Good afternoon. We are meeting today for the fourth time with Vincent Colapietro from Rhode Island. And our topic today is logical emotions. The title sounds like a contradiction in terms, a contradictio in adjecto. But of course, Professor Vincent Colapietro, once more, welcome and thank you in advance for being with us. Your topic today connects very well with the first meeting, which was on cognition, questions of cognition and semiotics, cognitive semiotics. For many thinkers, emotion is something different from logic and rationality. But Charles Sanders Peirce has some not so well-known ideas on connecting both. When Peirce's theory of emotion is a cognitive theory of emotion. So in this respect, today's topic connects very well with cognition and is no contradiction. Mm-hmm. But the details are still enigmatic because we are so used to thinking that logic admits no feeling, and we want to hear today how the two things go together. But we also want to hear perhaps something in this context. We all write academic papers, and we are always told to withhold our emotions, even our self. And now we hear that emotion even combines with logic. In how far does it combine with our academic activities, or research, in other words? These are some topics that Professor Colapietro will probably address. And without further ado, I pass the word to him.
Thank you, Winfried. Please, I want to pass it back to you very quickly because I want you to remind the viewers, and also in some sense remind me, of the question in the title of this exchange. Can sentiments be logical? Is that, do I have that right?
Yes.
Can sentiments be logical? And there's a way in which, ultimately, I'll try to make this clear, there's a way in which we might turn the question around and ask, must logic be sentimental? Must logic be sentimental? Must logic itself be rooted in sentiment? So I think we can play with the question, and I think the formulation of the question is a good one. Can sentiments be logical? But there are other questions very closely connected we might ask. But let me take a step back and pick up a thread of what you said. It's clearly the case that emotions are physiological reactions. It's clearly the case that emotions are psychological phenomena. But from a Peircean perspective, those characterizations of emotion are not altogether adequate. They are, so yes, we would have to, for a full account of human emotions, we'd have to give a physiology and a psychology. But if we stop there, it did not go on to give a semiotic of emotion, we would have fallen crucially short of giving an adequate account of human emotion. So nothing short of a theory that's rooted in a theory of emotions that's rooted in the theory of signs would be, from a Peircean point of view, adequate. First point, right? And this drives directly to your point. So in the theory of emotions, the kind of theory Peirce is articulating and defending is called a cognitive or cognitivist theory. So whatever an emotion is, it's not purely a reaction at a physiological level. Whatever an emotion is, it's not simply a phenomenon from a psychological perspective. It is a an emotion is a cognition among these other these other dimensions. And what this means principally, it is a judgment. It's not a verbalized judgment. It's a somatically felt and somatically, to some extent, articulated judgment. So the body, apart from language, let me go slowly and carefully. The body is making judgments that may or may not lend themselves to linguistic articulation. It's not that there's a dualism here. It's not as if there's a somatic judgment and then there's a linguistic formulation. It's the emotion is unified. The emotion is a cognition by its very nature, and it's a judgment. And in certain respects, it's a conjectural judgment. So my emotion might be an erroneous hypothesis. To take a very simple example, fear. Fear is, and he also, so there are two factors here that I want to make very explicit. One is the hypothetical character of human emotions, either all or most human emotions. So they're judgments in the form of hypotheses. And they also involve a predication. Emotions are implicitly, in effect, predications. I am saying something of something when I'm feeling something. So it's a predication from the Latin, which means to say of. I am saying something, I am in effect, not that I'm verbalizing it necessarily, and ordinarily I'm not verbalizing it. I am in effect saying something of something when I'm feeling fear. And when I'm feeling fear, what I'm saying of this object or event is that it is imminently injurious. I am in the presence of something that can injure me. So my very feeling is a judgment about being in the proximity of something imminently injurious or harmful. And that judgment might be wrong. That's judgment. I'm predicating it of something. I'm predicating in the lion that just walked in the room. I'm predicating it of the car traveling at this degree of speed. going along these roads. So it's a predication and a hypothesis. Another point of clarification that's really crucial is that there is an unsettled terminology here. Passions, feelings, emotions, sentiments, and there are other words that are part of our vocabulary of human affection, including affection, affects. So, and Peirce tended to use these words, as one might suspect, by somebody who was devoted to the ethics of terminology. Peirce tended to use these words in a careful, principled manner. But he wrote a great deal, and he did not always use them in as careful a manner as we might like or he might have aspired to. So these are not necessarily, and in fact, for the most part, they are not synonyms. Feeling, emotion, passion, sentiment, affection, affect. Let's focus upon three for the moment. Stop me at any point, please. Let's focus upon three: feeling, emotion, and sentiment. Feeling is the phenomenon in which firstness is predominant. And feeling is the most ineffable and elusive. It is a term pointing to the most ephemeral, elusive, ineffable of the dimensions of our affective life. When we get to emotions, we're getting to something much more readily identifiable. And when we get to sentiment, we're getting to something that is like emotion in being identifiable, in part because it's replicable. It's able to be replicated or repeated. You do not feel only anger on one occasion. You feel anger on a multiplicity of occasions. And however differently textured and differently colored is your anger in this context and in this other situation and this yet other situation, there's a commonality to the situations and the reaction such that using the same word to designate the emotion makes perfect sense. So too sentiment has that. Feeling is much more difficult to pin down. So emotions are judgments, and many of them tend to be episodic. You feel anger upon an occasion. It is an episode. Now, it is the case that some people are dispositionally angry. They have anger as simply a defining characteristic of their personality. But when we think about the emotion of anger, we're talking about something, for the most part, which is episodic rather than dispositional. Sentiment. Now, let me stop myself and make a bibliographical point or two, and then pick up the what I want to say about sentiment. I'll forget that. The bibliographical point begins with David Savin. For anybody who wants to do work on Peirce's theory of emotions, one needs to start there. One needs to start with the essay written by David Savin for a conference in Amsterdam in 1976. And then the Bicentennial Congress, the proceedings of that were edited by Ken Kettner and Joseph Ransel and others. And in that wonderful collection of essays is a piece by David, and it is entitled Peirce's Semiotic Theory of Emotion. It is certainly not the last word. certainly not that, but it is the first word or one of the first words. And so to do work on Peirce's theory of emotions, one can do no better than beginning with David Savin's contribution to the Bicentennial Congress, proceedings of the Bicentennial Congress, and look at that David's Peirce's semiotic theory of emotion. Then you and Lucia, and in fact I, have pieces in a forthcoming book that are very Peircean. And the book is by, you reminded me of this before the broadcast. The book is edited by Susan Petrilli and a colleague from Australia. And it's called Translating Emotions. And it's subtitled Interdisciplinary and Intercultural Encounters. And so Lucia's piece and your piece, and I think my piece, make a contribution that takes into account what David did in that piece that was written 35 or more years ago. And then we try to carry the investigation of Peirce's semiotic theory of emotion. We try to carry that forward. And then, of course, Short and others have pieces. Short has a wonderful piece on perception and sentiment in the volume that in the issue of the Transactions of the Peirce Society that was devoted to the memory of Richard Robin. So bibliographically, there is not a vast secondary literature, but there is an informative, important literature. And I mentioned your essay, and I mentioned Lucia Santaella's essay, I mentioned David's essay, and I mentioned Tom Short's essay. I think my essay might merit also attention. Okay, bibliographically. Now let me pick up the thread that I interrupted myself to give that brief bibliographical note. So whereas the emotions tend to be episodic, though some of them are dispositional, the sentiments are, and I'm using David's wonderful characterization of the sentiments, they're enduring, stable, and ordered habits of feeling. So whereas most of the most characteristic emotions tend to be episodic and therefore transient, they come and go, the sentiments tend to be stable characteristics, enduring traits of the semiotic self. So love understood as a sentiment is not a momentary feeling. Love as a sentiment is a more or less enduring, settled disposition to react in certain ways in certain contexts. And it expresses itself in any number. It's a disposition to respond in certain ways, but the range of responses is wide, and the forms of response are extremely variable. And we all know how love expresses itself concretely, specifically in this situation, might be very different from how love expresses itself by the same person to that same person in another situation. So love as a sentiment, hope as a sentiment, and faith as a sentiment. These are the ones that are most focal to Peirce's concern. These are the ones that he identifies as crucially linked to rationality. Faith, hope, and love. love principally understood as agape, the Greek word for a certain kind of love, although there are erotic dimensions to be sure. And there are dimensions of philia or friendship to be sure. So there's a sense in which all three Greek words, philia, friendship, eros, erotic love, and agape, dimensions of all three are intricately intertwined in the Peircean understanding of the sentiment of love. So, sentiments in general are stable, enduring dispositions to feel, and on the basis of that feeling, to act and imagine in certain ways, in certain circumstances. And the lover is especially attuned to what might be called kairos. It's the Greek word for the opportune moment. So chronos, and why am I speaking Greek today? I don't know. Chronos is one Greek word for time, and kairos is another. And kairos is the opportune moment. So the musician has a sense of timing. The athlete has a sense of timing. The friend and the lover have a sense of timing. The parent or the teacher, if that individual is going to be effective as a parent or as a teacher, has a sense of timing. You know when to back off your child and give your child space. Now's not the time. And you know when you need to go to you don't know, but you have a rather keen sense that now's the time I need to go and comfort this child. It's a sense of timing. Your very close friend loses a spouse or loses a parent. You don't wait a year to write a condolence. That your kairotic sense is really screwed up. If you right, you try to communicate your sadness for their loss in a prompt way. Your kairotic sense, your sense of what is the best moment, the best time, the opportune time to communicate your sadness for their loss is sooner rather than later. Okay, so these sentiments, sentiment in general, but these sentiments in particular, turn out to be either constitutive of rationality, faith, hope, and love, are either constitutive of rationality or very close to being constitutive of rationality. Being rational in the Peircean sense is not being simply, or even perhaps primarily, logical. Rationality is far more than logicality for Peirce. It is being but why be logical and how to be logical? And only the person who has these logical virtues in Peirce, or better, he calls them logical sentiments. The logical person is the person animated by the logical sentiments, the sentiments of faith, hope, and love. And you are not truly logical in Peirce's judgment unless you're animated by these. So there's a sense in which these are constitutive, these sentiments are constitutive of reason as envisioned by Peirce. You have to identify with the infinite, open-ended community of inquirers. And that identification with the community of inquirers has to entail practically your willingness to sacrifice for that community, even though you will not be here to see what your contribution to that community has been. And only such a person whose identification in sentiment, he uses that expression, our identification in sentiment with a community. He does it several times. He doesn't do it often, but the fact that he doesn't do it often doesn't mean it's not fundamentally important. It is fundamentally important. I identify in sentiment with a community. Yes, some finite historical community, but the finite historical community only because it is a representation or a segment of an infinite, ongoing, in a sense, this is very dangerous to say, in a sense, a trans-historical community. Of course, it's a community in time and in history, but it transcends any particular moment of time and any particular period of history. It's my thoroughgoing identification in sentiment with the infinite community, expressed in a willingness to sacrifice myself for what I can never see. And that's where the faith part comes in. I have faith in things unseen. He's drawing very, very heavily upon Paul, the Apostle Paul, and upon Christian scripture, and upon some of the basic meanings of these sentiments as they are articulated in this biblical tradition and in the religious writers on this tradition. So faith concerns things unseen, and it's closely connected with courage. If I have faith, I have courage to stand by my beliefs, even though I cannot see. You and I are not going to see what contributions, if any, you have made many, but what contributions we have made to the community of inquirers. We are simply, our historical locus is such that we are not in the position to see. But we have to be animated by faith, and that means being animated by courage to go on and persevere. And that connects with hope. Despair, Peirce rather pointedly says, and here's a person who was on the brink of despair, existential despair of a profound order, more than once in his life, to the point of contemplating suicide. But he says, despair is suicide. If I, as an inquirer, think that it is hopeless to go on inquiring, then I have virtually killed off inquiry. I have, at the very least, I've annihilated myself as an inquirer. So hope alone is rational for the inquirer. If I lose my keys in despair of ever finding them, I will not find them. My despair guarantees that I will not find them, to take a very trivial example. And my love involves this profound identification with the infinite community to the point of willing to sacrifice my life, my time, my devotion to the realization of that community in whatever imperfect, fallible way I can do. I'll stop, but let me summarize. Emotions are, in Peirce's vocabulary, different from sentiments, whereas emotions tend to be episodic, sentiments are enduring and stable characteristics of the semiotic self. And the three sentiments on which he focuses in connection with rationality and logic are faith, hope, and love. And these sentiments are either constitutive of reason or very close to being so. So that's what I wanted to say at the outset. I hope it gave you some points of entry and some places for interrogation.
Certainly, not only one, many. But let me perhaps say a few words about sentiments that you did not address. You, according to what you said, you might want to exclude them, such as the despair in front of the blank page of a student, or the who cannot express his or her ideas. So these are other sentiments involved in doing research. Would they be included, or would you say this is not the kind of emotion that is worthwhile considering, because it's too individualistic, for example?
Yeah, well, I would not say that. And I certainly wouldn't say it because they were two individuals. So let me back up and say there's an extremely wide array of human sentiments, and Peirce in several places implies as much. So I'm focusing very narrowly on logical sentiments. And I should have been clearer, and your questions is a very important one, because it gives me an opportunity to clarify. So there's an extremely wide array, and not all the sentiments are necessarily beneficial to the person who is animated by or possesses them. One might have the sentiment of worthlessness, which is closely connected to what you were talking about in reference to despair. So the way in which, the way in which a student can look at the blank page or not have the confidence to carry out the project and keeps on saying, I can't do this. And so plagued by self-doubts and crippled by a lack of self-worth, that there's an enduring disposition to judge oneself not good enough, or even worse, worthless. And this is where it borders on the therapeutic, right? It seems to me that with part of what any humane form of therapy involves is trying to identify those crippling sentiments, those self-destructive and self-nullifying and self-stultifying sentiments. So there's an extremely wide range of human sentiments, and they all need to be brought into play. They all need to be brought into the focus of critical consideration. And some of them are really quite destructive. So to be animated by them is to be complicit in one's own process of self-annihilation or self-limitation. And that's why re-narration, how is it that you came by that feeling? Or that's not the word. How did you come by that sentiment? And you try to get the person in therapy to re-narrate their lives in a different, re-narrate their lives and not tell themselves stories that keep on reinforcing the sentiment of worthlessness or not good enoughness. So no, there's a wider range of sentiments: benevolence, sympathy, empathy, antipathy, viciousness, and for any minimally adequate account of sentiments, we'd have to consider a very wide array and leave open the possibility that's always something important left out of our account. Human sentiments are that wide and various. So my very narrow focus on the logical sentiments was not intended to preclude or to erase these other very important, legitimate instances of sentiment. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for this clarification, which clarifies one focus. Let me only suggest that it's also worthwhile thinking about the expression logical in this context. We all know, but perhaps you can underline this once more, that Peirce's understanding of logic is not the understanding of positivist symbolic logic, formal logic, but he has a much broader conception of logic. But if you reduce it, logic, to this very narrow sense, does there anything remain from the Peircean view of involvement of logic in research? So actually, two things. On the one hand, the concept of logic itself. On the other hand, logic in the narrowest sense, doesn't it annihilate, so to speak, the rest of emotion that is still there? Or is it the same?
No. Well, it seems to me that if one takes logic to be a purely formal, empty set of symbols that really are used as calculi, then it is devoid of feeling. But as a matter of fact, logic in the purely formal sense is never purely formal, and it's somewhat akin to mathematics. Well, the mathematicians are going to say, "What an ugly proof that is," and they'll look for a more beautiful proof. And so there is a deeply felt sense of symmetry and elegance and beauty that's always implicitly guiding the mathematical and the logical mind. And Peirce in several places compares it to a sense of musicality. Yes, we can put the notes down. Yes, we can formalize it. But when the logician or when the mathematician is trying to craft a new notation, existential graphs, for example, and when they're merely the logician and the mathematician are using symbolic notation already crafted, there has to be a really deft feel for the mode of symbolization And just as a musician brings to the task a really nuanced, subtle, variable feeling for the medium of articulation, so too the logician and the mathematician bring to either the crafting of novel notation or simply the use of established notation. They have to have a feel for the medium of reasoning. So even formal logic is not a purely formal, emotionless activity.
Well, I think
inconsistency and just plain a crudely constructed proof hurts the sensibility of the logician or the mathematician.
mm-hmm.
You can see they have a visceral reaction, expressive of an emotional reaction to just how ugly that proof is. This can be done much more beautifully. Look. So I'm only answering one question. I lost the other question you were posing.
But I think the breadth of your answer comprises both questions already. So I think we have reached the point where we open the floor to questions from others.
Good. I always like this part too.
So here is the first. Peirce said that feeling is a rudimentary predicate. You mentioned that. Could you take it further?
Right. Thank you. This is a very important question, but once again, it's an extremely difficult question. So let me dwell a little bit on the terminological difficulties here. Sometimes Peirce will say, well, we'll identify consciousness and feeling. Then he will go on to say that consciousness needs to be understood in at least a threefold sense. So the firstness of consciousness is identifiable with feeling. Consciousness is also a phenomenon in which secondness, in the way of perception and exertion, are central and definitive. And then all of the various forms of consciousness in which mediation, learning, habit change, reasoning. But if we back up and we think about feeling, to be conscious is to feel. And consciousness in itself is feeling. But consciousness has evolved in us in such a way that it is more than simply feeling. And so what happens is for reasons that might have to do with my innate or instinctual constitution, or which might have to do with my learning, I attribute feeling to objects and events, which is to say, I predicate. My feeling is a prompt to predicate something of something else. This knife sticking into my side is painful. I take the predicate of pain and attribute it to the object, the knife as the cause of the pain. So I have a feeling, it is something in itself, but I predicate the feeling of something. So I say, I'm not, this is just hypothetical. I'm feeling nauseous, and I predicate that of, I say it of something I ate. So feeling in itself, feeling in its firstness, exists, simply is. But then we ordinarily attribute our feelings to objects and events. And to say we attribute them to objects and events is to say we predicate them. We say them of something. And so there's always this strong impulse to rush beyond the firstness of feelings and to predicate them. And this has a great deal to do with biological evolution. If we were lost in the dream of the dreams generated by the feelings of firstness, we would be exposed to countless dangers, and we would not ascertain. Can you hear me?
Yes, yes.
Okay, I'm frozen on my screen. That's all.
Yes, I see. Yes.
Yeah. So we can. I lost my. So we predicate them, and this has tremendous survival and other kinds of value.
And that's, of course, the point where it is clearest that Peirce's theory of emotion is a cognitive theory of emotion. But with this, Peirce is in a community of scholars that still today are doing research in emotion, but there is still today a divide between those who emphasize the cognitive view of emotion and those who
deny
believe
it.
Yes, deny it. Yes.
Yeah.
But,
yeah. Go on, please.
Yes. No, this is just a compliment.
Right. I realize that there is not universal or even altogether broad consensus within the community of inquirers devoted to the understanding of emotions. On the other hand, I have never seen a really good argument to show that emotions are not, to some degree, cognitive. I think what the anti-cognitivist or the non-cognitivists are arguing against is a straw man. The Peircean is not.
But there's also, I believe, there's also some element of dualism in.
Oh, to be sure.
And the dualists like to oppose emotion and logic.
Right. I mean, right. So surely the legacy of Descartes is after all this time still alive and well and living in any number of corners of the intellectual and the cultural world, and so the various mind-body dualisms still haunt us to this day. Also, the anti-cognitivist supposes, in some cases, that Peirce and others are denying what they are not denying. Yes, the emotions are physiological. Yes, they are psychological, but they are more than that. And here's where Peirce is so important. He's an anti-reductionist. He's not trying to reduce emotion to semiosis. He's just trying to say that there is an irreducible semiotic dimension to human emotion. He's not denying physiology and psychology. He's simply adding to it by emphasizing semiotics.
Mm-hmm. Well, this is certainly the point to ask for further questions. David, in the text you cited, views emotions as signs. Do you agree? And if so, can you show an example of an instance of such sign showing its representamen, its object, and its interpretant, Riccardo Gazzoni.
Thank you, Ricardo. That's a very good question. So the emotion itself is a sign. What the sign does is it generates interpretons, and it does not ordinarily generate simply a single interpreton, but much rather a whole series, and very frequently an open-ended series of interpretons. So what generates the sign, and what does the sign itself generate? And if I answer that question, then I answer Ricardo's very good question. A lion walks into my room. It generates the feeling of fear. The lion is the object of the emotion. The initial sign, felt fear, is the sign. But that sign mediates between the object and a series of interpretons. Now, one of the things it's going to do is the sign, the feeling sign of fear is going to, you're not going to sit there and let the lion eat you, are you? So one of the things it will generate is an energetic interpretant. You're going to either sit perfectly still and hope the lion doesn't see you or smell you, or you're going to try to move in such a fashion that you will escape this being. And the other thing the fear might do is it might generate any number of reflections upon possible strategies. So the sign, the feeling sign of fear would generate logical interpretants in the way of strategies to evade this animal that could cause one death. So the object is the lion. The initial the sign is the initial factor generated by the object, and the sign is both generated and generative. The sign is generated by the object. It's generative of interpretons. In this case, the sign, the feeling sign, would generate obviously feelings, emotional interpretons, obviously energetic interpretons, and quite possibly logical interpretons. I hope that answered the question.
We would have to ask this Ricardo, but while you were speaking, I had another question or another thought on the necessity of distinguishing these signs that you are talking about from, so to speak, tautological expressions of emotions. Laughter, if you say he is happy, it's almost a tautology. Sadness, you see the sadness in the face. This is, of course, also a sign. And fear.
Right.
Ekman believes that there are 5 basic emotions that you can read from a face.
Right.
But however that may be, can you say something to distinguish this kind of sign, external sign, from the signs that you described that are more profound?
Well, right. Thank you. I think I like that question. But the problem of tautology arises at the level of language, right? When we're talking about laughter, and then we describe laughter in terms of joy or happiness or whatever, that seems to me to be at the level of the meaning of the word, and we're not saying very much. But although it might not be purely tautological, there might be some slight enhancement or increment of meaning. But look, if we don't talk about laughter as a word, but we look at the phenomenon of laughter, we think about something provoked the laughter, something generated it, and that would be the object, and the laughter would be the sign, and then my laughter might cause me embarrassment. And then I try to inhibit my laughter, and that would be an energetic interpretant. Or I might continue laughing uncontrollably. And the continuance of laughter would be another instance of an energetic interpretant. And I might reflect upon, why did I think that was funny? And that would be a logical interpretant. So if we descend to the phenomenon and think about the phenomenon as a provocation to laughter, that something provoked the laughter, and identify the object, and then trace it through the sign, and then relate it to a series of interpretants, I think we have in hand a basic semiotic understanding of laughter that avoids the tautology.
Yes, that's a very clear answer. Thank you for clarifying it, because it's another aspect of the answer, emotions as a sign.
Right.
Further questions? Soraya, what is nonsense? I consider that it is in the order of 1 and 2. How can we observe this element?
Okay.
Soraya first and third, not second. Sorry, she corrects that.
Might I ask for clarification? Are we talking about the categories when we say first, second, and third?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So she continues to ask very deep and difficult questions. Let me back up and say that nonsense, I think of nonsense in some ways as analogous to silence. Now they're very different, right? But there is not one kind of silence, right? There are various forms of silence. There's reverential silence. There's the silence that is born of extreme anger. There is a silence of indifference. How is that relevant to the question, the very fine question just posed? It seems to me that there's more than one genre of nonsense. So we'd have to explore what some of those more important genres of nonsense are. One way we might think about it is, and I'm trying to think here about the relationship between the nonsensical and the irrational. Sometimes we defeat our own purposes, and when we engage in self-defeating endeavors or self-defeating activities, we're acting irrationally and possibly nonsensically. If you want to write that book, sit down. You can stop going out and spending all of your time with friends playing music, and sit down in the solitude of your study and write it. But you seem to be, I'm just speaking hypothetically, one seems to be avoiding the very activity that would alone accomplish the purpose. So there are various kinds of nonsense. And that which is utterly beyond the possibility of meaning. So two fundamental varieties of nonsense might be that, right? That which is utterly beyond the possibility of meaning, and in contrast, that which arises in the context of meaning, but in some sense violates the norms of intelligibility or the minimal requirements for meaningful discourse. So I take there to be an extreme form of nonsense that's just beyond any possibility, and then the kind of nonsense that only meaningful speakers can lapse into, if that makes any sense. The nonsense that's a violation of the norms of intelligibility and meaning, as those norms have established themselves within some set of symbols, within some language.
Mm-hmm.
And just to relate it more directly even to the question, meaning is inherently triadic, and therefore it inescapably falls into the category of thirdness. In itself, firstness and secondness are unintelligible. They get their intelligibility insofar as they can be brought within spheres of mediation. So that's where I fully agree with the questioner.
Mm-hmm. So, are there further questions? Yes. Bearing in mind that technologies are extensions of our own intelligence, is it possible to think about a genuine form of cyber informational semiosis in the performance of a supercomputer? Or, to put it in another way, would a machine semiosis be possible without overcoming the hard problem of consciousness?
Yeah. So my inclination is, and I have thought about this question, and I have thought, I think, long and hard about it, but I don't think I have thought about it as long and as hard as gives me much confidence in what I'm about to say. But I am disposed to say I don't see any problem with machine semiosis. The hard problem in Mark Champagne's book, I think, in his reflections on qualia, is a start for thinking about the hard problem and how qualia are part and parcel of certain forms of consciousness, but they're not, and consciousness is integral to certain forms of reasoning, but it is not, but qualia and consciousness do not seem, to me at least, to be integral to all forms of logical operation. Some logical operations can be performed in a very sophisticated way by machines. And so I do not see any insurmountable problem in talking about machine intelligence or machine semiosis. Now, what are the limits? That's another question. But I think the operation of what used to be called logical machines the operation of such machines seems clearly to have crossed the threshold of what we would think of as very sophisticated, high-level forms of logical operations, such that the computers can beat humans at chess. Yeah.
So, further questions? Doesn't all difficulties come from one point only, and that comes from we do not have a set of words which embrace logic and sentiment?
So my initial reaction to such questions, not just this one, is to say no. I tend to be a methodological pluralist. I am dubious or skeptical that all problems come down to one. Having said that, is what Peter, right? Is what Peter identified one of the most important roots of the problem? I would say emphatically yes. Is it the sole root of the problem? I would hesitate. I would need to think longer and harder than I have. The other thing is, it seems to me that we need to be careful in being appreciative of actually how much we have accomplished. We do not have a universally accepted language in which reason or logic and sentiment have been carefully and intimately integrated, and so the connections are much easier to see. But we certainly have in John Dewey's aesthetics, in Peirce's semiotics, in any number of theories, resources for exhibiting the very intimate connection. So I don't think that our inherited language is so invincibly dualistic as to inhibit us entirely. I think we have, to put it positively, I think we've made markedly positive strides in showing how sentiment and reason, including logic, but not limiting ourselves to logic, how reason and sentiment are actually integrated, not separate. So while much of our language is dualistic and defeats our purpose, some of it is not, and some of us gives theoretical, linguistic, and symbolic resources for articulating just how akin and in certain respects unified are sentiment and reason.
Mm-hmm. And just as a reminder, your topic today is a proof that it is possible to bring the two things verbally together, namely logical sentiments.
Yeah.
You need two words, that's true, but is it always necessary to have one word that covers all? But let us postpone this question and ask whether there is another question yet. Can you recommend more readings for us to study this topic further?
Well, yes. So there are several distinct literatures, and I cannot recommend. So there is the literature of those who are devoted to the philosophy of mind, and in conjunction with the philosophy of mind, have articulated a theory of emotion. And they make little or no reference to Peirce. But they're nonetheless immensely valuable resources to Peirceans who are interested in these questions. And one philosopher of mind whom I cannot recommend more highly is the British philosopher Anthony Kenny. And he has a number of books on mind, and he always takes up questions of emotion and feeling. And he is a very strong and subtle advocate of precisely the position we were talking about, which is he is a cognitivist in the field of emotion theory. So Anthony Kenny is a very important resource. And I'm blanking on his name only in terms of whether it's Lion or Lions. Perhaps you can help me, Winfried.
Lions, I think.
With an S.
Yes, Lions.
Yeah.
Yes.
So he has a very fine book on emotion.
Yes.
It's an old Lions. It's an older book, but it's still, the argument stands up. It has not been superseded. There are other people such as Thalberg. And if you go through the footnotes in David Savin's article, you will see a number of references to cognitivists upon whom Savin has drawn. They are not Peirceans. They're they're philosophers of mind who are arguing for cognitivism. So one part of the answer to the question is there's the literature from the philosophy of mind of those who make little or no reference to Peirce. Then there's the Peirceans who are conversant with philosophy of mind. Lynn Stevens, David Savin, Winfried, Lucia, Tom Short, I'm blanking. There are others, to be sure, if I can give you, I can go in my library also and pull down some books. And titles to articles are not coming to me at this point, but if you write to me, I can give you a fuller bibliography. But as a first stab off the top of my head, those are some of the recommendations I would make.
Mm-hmm. Well, it looks like some questions are still open by auditors who have already asked questions. So on the other hand, we are close to our time limit, and to give the last question to somebody who has already asked one might be a bit inappropriate. So if there is one question by somebody who has not yet asked a question, but Ricardo says briefly, okay, then briefly. The object determines the sign. The lion provokes fear. Imagine a person that does not know that a lion is dangerous. This person will not feel the fear.
Right, Ricardo. So I might feel, it works both ways. I might feel afraid of something which is not injurious, or I might lack the feeling of fear in the presence of something that is injurious. And the beauty of cognitivism as a theory of emotion is that it captures the fact that I might be, my emotions might be inappropriate. They might be mistaken. So there is a deficiency or a lack in the person who does not feel fear. That person lacks an understanding of the situation in which he or she is. And just as the person who feels tremendous fear and anxiety in the presence of what could never cause it any harm is mistaken in judgment. So the absence of fear is no argument against the semiotic and the cognitivist account of fear. It merely shows that emotions can be mistakes. They can be mistaken, just as verbal or linguistically articulated judgments can be mistaken. I can say that this creature is not dangerous, or I can not feel fear. In both cases, I'm making a judgment about the lion, and in both cases, I'm mistaken. Whether the mistake is at the level of visceral semiotic reaction that's not articulated in words, or whether it's articulated in words.
Mm-hmm. And of course, the lack of emotion in the case of fear may be dangerous. But with this, I think we must come to our end of our dialogue, which is in a way open-ended, certainly, but we must wield secondness here and cut it off without saying that we have reached an end. Thank you very much once more, Vincent, and I pass the last word to you once more.
Thank you so much. I have found these dialogues, these exchanges to be not merely enjoyable, but very provocative and worthwhile. I hope my frozen image on the screen is not taken as a symbol or a metaphor for the immobility or the frozenness of my thought. I hope my thought has come across as more fluid than my image. But it's been delightful to take part in this, and I hope that at some point there might be other occasions to pick up other threads of conversation. I wish you all the well. I wish you all the best. Be safe and stay safe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And now I do have a last word, namely that the first of our dialogues will come out in print in an edited form in the next issue of our review, the program's review called TEDCOGS. Thank you very much once more for having collaborated in this edition, which has footnotes and a more academic style. Goodbye then.
Goodbye.